Look down with me at verse 4. It says, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth." You see, in Egypt and Canaan, human and animal forms played an important function in depicting the attributes of a deity. They could see it, they could touch it. They'd have statues quite often to represent these different gods. The golden calf in Exodus 32, do read that. That's a great example of this, where Moses was up with God on the mountain, and it was 40 days, 40 nights. God's people lost patience, and so they couldn't see God. They couldn't see their leader, Moses, and in their impatience, they wanted to have something more tangible, so they create this golden calf out of their gold jewelry, just so they could have God a little closer to home, to be a bit more tangible. But the problem is that they were limiting God. They're making God less than what he is. That is the problem with worshipping things of this world that might resemble God. You see, these types of things are often referred to as idols in our lives. An idol is an image or representation of a god used as an object of worship, or a person or a thing that is greatly admired, loved, or revered. You see, we were made to worship. God created us as worshipping beings. But we're made to worship one thing alone, and that is God. In this sense, we all have a God-shaped gap in our hearts. Only God can fill that gap in our hearts. But we try to fill this gap with all sorts of things: family, work, sporting achievements, life goals, the kids, spouse. Well, how do we know if we're worshipping other things? Well, it's the level of importance that it takes in our lives. Now, some of these things are really important, but if we think about time, do we give those things an unhealthy amount of time in our lives? You know, we give them so much time. We must give them more time. I must give more time to work. I can't compromise work. Okay, and so, you miss out on family time. Or maybe the kids take priority. Nothing gets in the way of serving the kids. The kids are boss here. Me serving the kids. Or maybe bank balance is another way of seeing what level of importance we put to these idols in our life. Where is most of our money going? If you look to your bank balance, what would be your money be spending on? Thoughts. What do you think about most? What fills your mind most? What do you think about most? What do you daydream about most? See, we all have priorities in our lives, don't we? Who or what is number one in your life? Each person has a list of priorities. Most men might have their man shed or their garage full of all their gadgets and toys, top of their list. Most ladies at the top of the list will have, I'll let you fill in the gaps there before I put my foot in it. But we all have priorities, don't we? We all have something that's top of the list, and that will maybe change from day to day or week to week or season to season. But what or who is in the driver's seat of your life? What drives all the decisions? Maybe parenting is your God. You want the perfect children. Children need to be brilliant and excellent at everything. They need to have exemplary behavior. That is your God. And if they don't perform, then your world will be shattered. What about work? Success might be your God in work. If that success doesn't come, again, it destroys who we are, and we fight and we give it all the hours we can give at the compromise of other things that are important in our lives. Or maybe it might be a relationship, a spouse, a wife or a husband. They're your gods. They need to perform and make sure that they are perfect for you. Unless they're fulfilling that gap in your heart and that contentment in your heart, they're letting you down. Now, these things are all good things, but they're not to have the first place in our hearts. God is. See, when we worship other things, we're putting a terrible pressure on that thing to try and fill a gap that only God can fill. And it does talk about the consequences here, and I think it's worth touching, an important touch on this. It says in verses 5 and 6, "You shall not bow down to them or serve them, For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. It's important to touch on this because we must understand this is not an expression of generational curse or the idea that a person can inherit a curse from a previous generation, like a hereditary disease. They're expressions encouraging covenant fidelity, which extends from one generation to the next in God's people, the Israelites in the Old Testament. And it's certainly not to be seen as a mechanistic way in which I am to assume I will inherit the sin or the curses of my father or a previous generation, and therefore need delivery from these curses. How do we know this? Well, because the Bible tells us. We see in the Old Testament itself, Deuteronomy 24 verse 16 says, Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. 2 Kings 14 verse 6 says, But each one shall die for his own sin. Ezekiel 18 verse 20 says, The soul who sins shall die. The son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. In other words, Jesus has defeated all sin, and the price has been paid. If you believe and trust in Jesus, that sin has been dealt with. It has gone. So the good news, we don't need to go back into all our family tree to try and find something, dig something out, something that might be affecting us now, because Jesus paid for it. We don't need to go looking for something in our family tree, something that, Uncle Fred did on a night out in 1848. We don't need to do that. And that is good news because Jesus has sorted everything out on the cross if we trust and believe in him.